$43 million. Lost in 90 days. Not because Frontier had a bad quarter. Not because passengers stopped flying. Because Frontier had its best quarter ever, record revenue, record passengers, and still lost $43 million. When an airline fills more planes than ever before and still bleeds cash, that is not a rough patch. That is not just an airline struggling. That is an entire business model running out of time. And it started long before 2025. To understand how it got here, you have to go back to the beginning. Frontier was born in Denver on July 5, 1994. The idea was simple. Keep the airline lean. Keep fares low. Make the money work through volume. Their timing was not an accident. Continental Airlines had just shut down its Denver hub, leaving a gap in the market that nobody had filled yet. Frontier walked straight in. They started with a handful of routes, a small fleet, and one very clear promise: cheap seats for ordinary Americans. For years, it worked. The airline grew. The routes expanded. The model held together. But then Frontier made a decision that changed everything.
Frontier's flight operations are moving to focus on same-day trips. Since planes are flying out and back in the same day, it will limit multi-day trips for their flight attendants.
Around 2014, the airline looked at Spirit and saw something it wanted to copy. Spirit had turned ultra-low-cost flying into a machine. Stripped the cabin down to nothing. Advertise fares so cheap they looked almost free. Then charge for everything else: bags, seat selection, boarding priority, even printing a boarding pass at the airport. The base fare got the passenger in the door. The fees made the business work. Frontier adopted that model completely. And for a few years, it looked like genius. Passengers flooded in, chasing the lowest number on the screen. Revenue climbed. The ultra-low-cost model was spreading. But here is what nobody said out loud in those Denver boardrooms. Spirit, the airline Frontier was copying, was quietly drowning in debt. And Frontier was following them off the same cliff. Aviation never stays simple. Jet fuel costs jumped 40% between 2021 and 2023. Labor costs at U.S. airlines rose 15% in a single year. Frontier had no cushion for either. And when those changes hit a low-cost airline with no premium cabin, no corporate network, and no loyalty program to fall back on, there is very little room to absorb the shock. Delta can lose money on 100 cheap seats and make it back in business class. United can take a hit on a domestic route and cover it with a transatlantic premium fare. Frontier cannot do any of that. It has to win every single day on volume. The planes have to fly often. The seats have to stay full. The extra fees have to keep coming in. And the costs have to stay below the revenue line. That is a narrow path. And it gets narrower every year. The Q1 2025 numbers made that painfully clear. Frontier brought in $912 million in revenue. That sounds strong. But the airline still lost $43 million. Read that again. Record revenue, still a loss. That is the kind of number that tells you the business is not just underperforming. It is failing to turn scale into profit. The real problem becomes even clearer when you look at cost per mile and revenue per mile. Frontier's cost per mile was $9.63. Its revenue per mile was $9.17. That gap might look small on paper. It is not small at all. It means Frontier is spending more to fly than it is earning from each mile. Every takeoff is carrying a little too much weight. Every flight is running a little too close to the edge. And in a business with margins this thin, there is no such thing as a small problem. A weather disruption costs more than it should. A slow booking period hurts more than it should. A fuel spike lands harder than it should. When an airline lives this close to the line, everything hurts more. Then came Spirit. In 2022, Frontier made the boldest move in its history. It offered $2.8 billion to merge with Spirit. The plan made sense on paper. Combine the two biggest ultra-low-cost carriers in America. Build something big enough to compete with the giants. Create enough scale to finally make the model work. But JetBlue had other ideas. It countered with $3.6 billion. Spirit as shareholders looked at the two numbers and chose the bigger one. Frontier was out. Then JetBlue's deal collapsed anyway. A federal judge blocked it in 2024. Spirit filed for bankruptcy. And Frontier was left standing exactly where it started, only now with more pressure, less time, and a market that had just watched its closest peer fall apart. That is where the story gets ugly. After Spirit collapsed, Frontier announced 42 new routes. On paper, that looked aggressive. It looked like a winner moving fast. But growth is not always a sign of strength. Sometimes it is a sign that management sees a gap and knows it has to move before someone else does. Here is the problem nobody is talking about. Frontier has around 30% capacity overlap with Spirit routes. Same kind of customer. Same kind of pricing pressure. Same kind of thin margins. So when Spirit broke, Frontier did not get a clean victory. It got a battlefield. Spirit is still flying discounted seats to generate cash before the final shutdown. Every route Spirit is desperately cutting prices on, Frontier has to match. Every market Spirit is fighting to survive in, Frontier is fighting there too. Frontier is locked in a price war with a zombie airline that has nothing left to lose. And that is a brutal place to be. The fleet plan tells the same story. Frontier deferred 54 aircraft deliveries to 2029 through 2031. These were not just planes. These were newer, more fuel-efficient Airbus jets that would have lowered operating costs and made the airline more competitive. Frontier pushed them 4 to 6 years into the future because it cannot absorb them right now. That is not the move of a company racing toward growth. That is the move of a company buying time. Airlines do not defer that many deliveries unless the economics feel wrong. Unless the future looks uncertain. Unless management is being careful about how much the airline can actually handle. Frontier is not acting like a company that believes the runway ahead is clear. It is acting like a company bracing for turbulence. And then there is the competition closing in from above. Delta, United, and American watched the ultra-low-cost model rise, and they adapted. They launched their own basic economy fares. Stripped-down tickets. No seat selection. No changes. No refunds. Legacy airlines started offering Spirit-style prices on their own planes. Now a passenger can book a cheap fare on a full-service airline with a loyalty program, a working app, and a network that actually connects somewhere useful for roughly the same price as a Frontier ticket. So the question becomes obvious. Why would you choose Frontier? Frontier cannot out-cheap the legacy carriers forever. And it cannot out-comfort them either. Scott Kirby, United CEO, said Frontier was the last man standing on a sinking ship. Barry Biffle, Frontier's CEO, fired back. He said the model was alive and well. But the numbers are not agreeing with him. That is how decline looks in aviation. Not with sirens. Not with fireworks. With numbers that slowly stop working. The costs are high. The margins are thin. The competition is stronger. The fleet is being pushed out. The closest rival just went bankrupt. And the gap between revenue and profit is still too small for comfort. Frontier is not dying loudly. It is not collapsing in one headline moment. It is being squeezed slowly, quietly, from every direction, by a business model that has less room for error than it used to. $43 million. Lost in 90 days. Record revenue. Still a loss. That is the real story here. And if you want to understand where aviation goes next, watch the airlines that are still flying, but already losing the ground beneath them. If this story made you think, subscribe to my channel.